One of the big surprises was the prevalence of Christmas ghouls.
So when did Christmas become Christmas, like we kind of think of it today?
If you mean like the full tree and Santa Claus, that wouldn't be until the 1800s. The Christmas tree goes back to the Middle Ages, and the celebration of Christmas goes back to the 300s, celebrating, the nativity of Jesus Christ. So we've been celebrating it for a very long time, but we've certainly added a lot of customs along the way.
If I were to kind of go back in a time machine from right now, 2024, when would I be like, oh, this Christmas looks like my Christmas?
I would say actually probably around the Civil War, because you had both the Christmas tree and Santa Claus by that time. And you also had that kind of sentimentality, warm feelings that was actually promoted by the North during the Civil War to sort of counteract the doldrums and the depression of the war.
Is Christmas uniquely American in any way?
America has done a great deal to shape the modern Christmas. Santa Claus was an American invention. It was New York poets that transformed St. Nicholas into Santa Claus. The Christmas tree is German, but we certainly made a big deal about it. And it's because of America that the Christmas tree is now popular in countries where it wasn't popular before.
So, kind of backtracking so we can go forward, so to speak. Was Christmas a thing that somebody planned? Like somebody somewhere said, we're going to have Christmas? Or was this a thing that just kind of happened in society and evolved into what we know today?
It absolutely evolved. There was no central planning at all. Anytime there was central planning, it was attempts to suppress Christmas, which has happened several times. The Puritans, for example, hated Christmas with a fiery passion, and factories and schools would be open on Christmas Day in order to keep you from celebrating Christmas.
Why were they so against Christmas? Like,
it was papist. It was way too Catholic. And so the Puritans in Boston, they hated the Irish celebrating Christmas. So they would even have the factories start their shift extra early in the morning so that the Irish could not attend Christmas Mass.
So when we look at kind of the first Christmas, I believe you said around the year 300, what would that have looked like?
It would have been a purely religious celebration. You would have had Mass on December 25th. It would have been a very big deal, a high-ranking feast. In the church calendar for really big days, they have what is called an octave, where you celebrate it for 8 days. And so they would have had an octave from between December 25th to January 1st. I don't know about gift giving. So the Romans used to exchange gifts on January 1st, the start of the civic new year. And I imagine Christian Romans just continued that custom. But then, needless to say, in some parts, that moved to December 25th.
What was kind of the original intent behind it? Was it to celebrate the birth of Jesus, or was it more than that, or what was kind of the original intent?
It was very much to celebrate the birth of Jesus. And then it also coincided, or not coincided, but was around the time of the Feast of the Epiphany on January 6th. And that was also considered a very important feast day because that's when the Magi, the three kings, visited Jesus. And that's considered a very big deal because the Magi were not Jewish. They were Persian. And so this signified that Gentiles and not just Jews could be part of the new covenant.
Has it always been December 25th, or has that evolved over time?
In the West, the Latin-speaking West, December 25th was always the day for celebrating Christmas. In the Greek-speaking East, they celebrated Christmas and Epiphany at the same time on January 6th. But then they eventually followed the Roman custom and moved the birth of Jesus to December 25th and then kept the Epiphany at January 6th.
What do you know why they moved it? Like, the thing that I've always heard is that December 25th was originally a pagan holiday, but that's the kind of thing that, like, okay, I've never actually like looked this up in any way.
Well, it gets really complicated. So here's what we know. The Romans celebrated a feast of the unconquered sun, S-U-N, sometime in the 300s. And then 40 years later, Christians started celebrating December 25th as the birth of the Son of God, S-O-N. So the theory was, oh, well, they were just co-opting a pagan holiday. Here's the problem with that theory. Another 40 years before the Romans instituted that feast, we have written evidence that Christians in Rome believed that Jesus was born on December 25th. They didn't celebrate it as a feast then, but we know they thought he was born on December 25th before the Romans instituted that pagan feast.
Is it a little bit 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, chicken and the egg kind of thing? Like somehow these two things came together. We're not entirely sure how.
It could be a pure coincidence, but the other fascinating possibility is not that the Christians were co-opting the Romans, but that the Romans were trying to co-opt the Christians.
Why is that? Why is there a difference, I guess?
So, in other words, there's the possibility that the pagan Romans felt threatened by the growing number of Christians, and to steal their thunder, they slap on this feast of the unconquered sun on the date when the Christians believed that Jesus, their Messiah, was born.
Is this a hotly debated subject amongst experts like yourself, or is this kind of like, look, we don't know?
There is absolutely no consensus. There are a number of different theories. We just don't know.
When we kind of look back at it, like to me personally, religious or not, Christmas is like, that's the holiday. That's the big holiday by a long stretch. Was it a big deal back then?
I don't know how big it started, but it quickly grew to be big. So, for example, I mentioned they probably celebrated in the 300s an octave, 8 days of celebration. By the 500s, they're celebrating the 12 days of Christmas. They've extended the merriment from December 25th to January 6th, Feast of the Epiphany.
How come we lost all those days? Like, I want those days back.
Oh my goodness, by the time you get to the Middle Ages, the 12 days of Christmas were 12 days of unbroken merriment. Shops would be closed, law courts would be closed. You made sure that you had all the firewood you needed, all the meat you needed prior to Christmas. Even your farm animals were supposed to get off the 12 days of Christmas. It was like the greatest period of leisure in the entire year.
What happened?
The Reformation didn't help because there were some, like the Puritans, who were anti-Christmas, and they suppressed it in England and in America. And then I think, yeah, industrial society, modern work schedules, I think that undermined it as well.
Man, we used to have like 2 weeks. That'd be amazing. Now we got like an hour.
And then the other problem is we have what's called Christmas creep, where every year the Christmas season seems to start earlier and earlier. You know, like I went to my local hardware store in late September. They had Halloween decorations up next to Christmas decorations. They had like Santa Claus and skeletons cheek to jowl. It was really weird. So when you do that, when you start the commercial season earlier and earlier, by the time you get to Christmas Day, you're practically sick of it.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's a healthy model either. You know, they used to celebrate Advent, which was this period of joy but restraint. And then when Christmas came, you pulled out all the stops.
So as we kind of move forward, right? Okay, we got 300. Christmas is kind of getting established. When would you say like it really starts to spread around the world?
Definitely the 19th century, because you've got the Americans uh, bringing together Santa Claus and the Christmas tree. And then on the other side of the ocean, you've got Dickens. Charles Dickens did a great deal to revivify and expand upon Christmas cheer, Christmas coziness. He added a lot of warmth to the holiday. So you
That
put those two together and you get our modern Christmas.
looking between 1500 and the 19th century. Is there big changes in Christmas, or is it just kind of incrementally inching forward?
The big change that really happened in that period is that it shifted from being more of a time of adult merriment to being more child-centered. Like we always think of, Santa Claus and gifts primarily for children. But when we were doing the 12 days of Christmas, it was basically 12 days of the adults partying. And so it did become more sort of child-centered in the 19th century.
So, how does Santa get involved?
Santa was invented in New York City. There had been a custom of St. Nicholas giving gifts to children on his feast day, which is December 6th. And that custom was in New York City because of the Dutch. The Dutch had a very deep devotion to St. Nicholas, and they were the ones, of course, who founded the city. It was New Amsterdam. When the English took over, the Dutch continued this custom. And the English kids started to get jealous because every December 6th, the Dutch kids were getting presents and the English kids weren't. So but they didn't want to do St. Nicholas. That again, a saint, that's too Catholic. So eventually what happened was they moved the gift giver from December 6th to December 25th. And then they made St. Nicholas Santa Claus.
Can you kind of trace these changes back to one person?
Probably the biggest influence was, Clement Moore, the author of 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. He's the one who made Santa, come down the chimney, have 8 tiny reindeer. Rudolph was added only in 1939, thanks to a poem by a guy who worked at Montgomery Ward. So yeah, Clement Moore would be the big guy.
He would be the kind of one. The other changes that are around it, though, were those kind of societal shifts that we just kind of edged away at this, so to speak.
Honestly, I would say it was probably 3 New York City authors plus an artist named Thomas Nast, who was one of the first people to draw pictures of Santa Claus. And his version is still the version that sticks in our mind.
When would you kind of looking at it, when would you say commercialization hit?
Early 20th century. Vendors realized, oh, we're giving gifts now? We'll buy our stuff in order to give gifts. And another big influence for commercialization was Coca-Cola. If you remember those ads they had from the early 20th century, they loved showing Santa with a bottle of Coke because Santa's colors are red and white. And guess whose colors are also red and white?
Do you feel like, did the commercialization change people's attitudes? Have we moved away from the fundamental thing that this was supposed to be?
Oh, there's always that danger. And what's interesting is that this is not a new worry. As soon as things got more commercialized in the early 20th century, you already had editorials worrying that the season was getting too commercial. So the worries about commercialization are as old as commercialization itself. And of course it's a genuine worry, but maybe if we keep worrying about it, it won't turn into a bigger danger.
Yeah, that makes sense. I remember the kind of war on Christmas period. Have things like that, if you can, kind of remind the audience, okay, what is the war on Christmas? And then have things like that happened in the past.
There has been a war on Christmas since the very first Christmas. You know, King Herod tried to suppress the first Christmas. Um, and I mentioned the Puritans in the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries. Um, the more recent war on Christmas is a sort of attempt to secularize the holidays. So the war took the shape of you shouldn't say Merry Christmas, you should say Happy Holidays, and you shouldn't have public displays of, you know, the nativity, that sort of thing. But I think that's kind of died down.
Are you ready for some harder slash listener submitted questions?
Go for it.
Are there other kind of more unique Christmas traditions that have come out? Like, what are some of the Christmas traditions you've found?
Oh, well, one of the fun things in researching my book on Christmas is noting, realizing how much diversity there actually is. So we of course are used to our modern Christmas, but historically there are all kinds of other customs and beliefs. For example, one of the big surprises was the prevalence of Christmas ghouls. Like, you know, when Dickens writes A Christmas Carol and Ebenezer Scrooge is visited by three ghosts, that's not an isolated incident. He was actually drawing from a very long tradition of ghost stories around Christmas time. And there were goblins, witches, werewolves, all kinds of menacing spirits around Christmas time. And I think they were there to, in a sense, make the brightness of the holiday even brighter. You know, the weather outside is frightful, but the fire is so delightful. Christmas coziness, in a sense, needs to have an enemy, right? It has to have frightful weather or frightful ghouls in order to ramp up that warm, fuzzy feeling you're feeling inside.
Were those American traditions, or were those kind of traditions that came over from other parts of Europe and the West and the East?
Yeah, other parts of Europe. And you know, different European countries had different ghouls. But the idea, but it's still an American thing. You know, the song, It's the Most Wonderful Time of the Year. That's what, 1960? One of the verses is, there'll be scary ghost stories. So that's in the American drinking water.
I never really noticed that, but now that you mention it, it's like, oh yeah, the weather. Like there are things that are associated with scariness in there, isn't there? Krampus is the big one that I've always heard of. Are there other ones like Krampus?
There are indeed. Different countries or different regions had different boogeymen. Krampus is one. There's a devil in the Czech Republic called Chert, who's similar to Krampus. There is a child-eating scarecrow in parts of France called Hans Trap. Yeah, there are all kinds of weird boogeymen.
Was that there from the beginning too, or is that something that kind of evolved over time?
Some of these ghouls could have been pre-Christian superstitions that were then put to use for the Christmas story.
What would you say was kind of the low point of Christmas? Like, where did you like, oh, we almost lost it? Or as close as we came to almost losing it?
The 19th century Puritan Boston, they suppressed the holiday. And then in England, when they had their revolution and the monarchy was toppled, this is in the 1600s, Oliver Cromwell, I think, took over. They suppressed Christmas, and the police would literally walk through the streets on Christmas Day, and if they smelled a Christmas goose being cooked, they would bang on the door, arrest the family, and throw them into jail.
Oh my God. How did they do that? I mean, that's like throwing the whole city into jail at the end of it.
Oh my gosh, the English hated it. The Puritans eventually held out, but the mayor of Canterbury tried to enforce the law, and the townspeople were so furious that, according to the report, every window in his house and every bone in his body was broken.
Oh my God! Did they kill him?
He lived.
What do you think the future is?
I do not anticipate any huge developments for the future. I think we will continue with the current modern features: gift giving, Santa Claus, eggnog, Christmas tree. I just don't see any of those things going away soon.
Do you think anything could be added? Is there anything that you see as like an up and comer, like, ooh, that could make its way into our new Christmas traditions?
Well, here's an interesting question for you. So, Nick, have you ever heard of the Christmas pickle?
N- I feel like yes, but I have to say no, if that makes any sense. Like that sounds familiar, but I can't associate anything with it.
So I like to ask people this question because I never heard of a Christmas pickle growing up. And no, and only when I was writing the book did I hear about this Christmas pickle. So it's a glass ornament pickle that you hide it in the Christmas tree. And the first person who finds it, they either get good luck for the whole year or they get a special extra present. It started in the Midwest about 100 years ago. We think it may be German immigrants who started it, even though there's no custom of it in Germany. So anyway, it appears to be growing in popularity. So now when I ask people, they either have kind of heard of it or they started doing it maybe 20 years ago, 10 years ago. So anyways, it's an interesting question to ask people. Do you know about the Christmas pickle? Do you practice the Christmas pickle? Because it does seem to be growing in popularity.
Does Elf on the Shelf count? Like I feel like Elf on the Shelf is making a big run for the new Christmas tradition.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, so there are little things like that. So yeah, they'll grow in popularity, but notice we're adding things, and none of these things is a game changer.
What's now? How did the tree make it in?
A lot of people will tell you that it was baptizing a pagan custom of the Yule tree in Germany. But what is interesting is that that is not true. We actually know for a fact that it is 100% Christian. The Christmas tree is actually the paradise tree, which is the tree. It's a combined tree of the two trees from the Garden of Eden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. That's why the red balls are the apples on the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and the sweets we put on the tree are the sweets of the tree of life. The tree was put up on Christmas Eve because that's the unofficial feast of Adam and Eve. And we commemorate Adam and Eve on December 24th to remind us why Jesus becomes man and is born on December 25th. It's to save us from the sin of Adam. And so the tree has everything to do with these Christian beliefs.
Why do we kiss under the mistletoe?
That too is Christian. Kissing is a sign of peace. And for the Druids, mistletoe was an herb of peace. If you greeted someone under the mistletoe, you would disarm and greet each other. And Christians took that and they added their signature greeting, which is the kiss of peace.
Is that this may be out of the bounds necessarily, so feel free if it is. Is that unique to Christmas that we have different religions and different beliefs and practices kind of merging a little bit into one holiday? Is that unique to Christmas, or is this the kind of thing like this kind of happens with everything?
Oh, St. Paul says, whatever you see is good in a culture, adopt it. And so Christianity has done a very good job. The term is enculturating. So it will, when it evangelizes a society, it will try to take what is best from that society and then, prune what is not good in that society.
Has Santa gone through changes, or has Santa always kind of been Santa?
Besides the transformation from St. Nicholas into Santa, the big transformation is when you read Clement Moore's poem, "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," Santa is not an employer of elves. Santa is an elf. He's called a right jolly old elf. And if you look at the earliest pictures of Santa, he is small. He's no bigger than, he was dwarf-sized. And remember, 8 tiny reindeer, according to Clement Moore. So everything was in miniature. So that's the way it started in 1803. But if you look at all the pictures of Santa in the 19th century, by the time you get to the end of the 19th century, he has achieved full human stature.
That's pretty much all the questions I got. Is there anything you think that we missed?
I think we're good.
If people kind of want to, where can they find the book if they want to know more about Christmas?
Why We Kiss Under the Mistletoe is available on Amazon and at all fine bookstores.